present the second panel of the day. It's led by Saab, and the focus is on autonomous systems and how to ensure the safe and responsible deployment of such systems. The panel will discuss various levels of autonomy in defense technology and the balance between complete automation on one side and retaining human involvement in operational processes. And I will leave it to our moderator to describe the panel and introduce the panelists. Please welcome the AI Innovation Architect at Saab, Erik Bergvall. Hi, Erik.
Thank you.
I leave the stage to you.
Thank you. Thank you.
And you know that I will receive questions that I will address, so leave a few minutes for me at the end of your panel.
Yes. So keeping people and society safe. Keeping people and society safe. That is Saab's slogan. And safe is a very deep personal emotion and feeling. And at this geopolitical landscape, and in this state where AI is racing into society, this challenges this feeling more than ever. And I will come to my personal journey of how I feel safe in this landscape in a minute. So my name is Erik Bergvall, and I work as an AI Innovation Architect at Saab. And in my job, I try to understand the Swedish total defense landscape. And in my spare time, I try to manipulate transformers and large language models to make them more independent and more alive than ever. And in this journey, I'm starting to model and think about how it's working, and it's starting to try and understand me, and it becomes this very deep connection where it becomes like a dance, and we start to understand each other. And this mind-AI journey, I would like to ignite you with as well. And it's just like when you use Google or ChatGPT or whatever web service, and you start to model and try to understand it, and it tries to understand you. And I just want you to go into this with more force than ever, because that is what is needed in order to make us feel safe in this environment. So now to our panel. So please welcome up Johan Harvard, Caroline Brondby, and Elias Julin. I will give a warm hand of applause. So shortly, Johan Harvard is Vice President at Silo AI. Carolina Brondby is Director Digital Policy Configuration of Swedish Enterprise. And Elias Julin is my colleague and an AI Innovation Engineer at Saab. So first of all, just tell us a little bit about yourselves and try to nuance this very short introduction. Johan.
Yes, hello everyone, very happy to be here. So Johan Harvard at Silo AI. What we do is we do applied AI. Applied AI across a lot of different industries. So from manufacturing and automotive to aerospace to medicine, drug discovery. And as you know, a lot of what we do these days is driven by data. So a lot of these things are enabled by data, and to make sense of it and create value from data, you need to put algorithms and AI on top of that. And that's what we do. We're about 300 people globally. Biggest teams are in Sweden and Finland, but we have teams in Germany, US, Canada, and so on as well. And really nice to see the boost that we're having today. There is a hype that is overblown, I would say, but it also opens people's minds to see what is actually possible.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, Carolina, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for the invitation. So I work at the Confederation of Swedish Enterprise, and I work with digital policy, and with that, what we do is that we follow regulations at EU level, everything that comes up. And as you maybe are aware of, there have been a huge wave of new regulations on data and related matters like cybersecurity. Thank you.
And yeah, finally, I work with Saab, as Erik introduced. We're a company that's very focused on keeping people and society safe. And now more than ever, we have a much larger responsibility to ensure that we stay ahead of world developments, particularly in this field.
Thank you. So welcome once again. And I'll throw this first question at Elias and me, perhaps, because I heard before that it was a little bit difficult to understand. So we'll have to try to address it. So as artificial intelligence continues to advance and integrate more deeply into society, it becomes more and more important to nuance and very precisely define the different levels of autonomy, from AI systems to fully autonomous systems. And why is this important, Elias?
From our perspective, we kind of go towards a autonomy by design, or a system design that allows for autonomy at various levels. So in our society today, you might encounter a human being acting upon an object, and that could be level 0, you could say. Then you move towards level 1, where they might be interacting with a computer. And then you keep on going, and the more assistance you get from a sort of AI-driven system or an autonomous system, it gets more and more in-depth. So then you go towards a system where maybe you start getting recommended to do certain actions by a AI system, but it does not act itself. Then you go towards the next step, where maybe it gives you a recommended decision and says, can I do it? And then eventually it goes, I'm going to do this, and you can stop me if you want. And then eventually it will act with providing no information whatsoever. And that is something we're seeing a lot and more of around the world in certain areas of development. And the reason why I think it's kind of an important topic to distinguish is, or those different levels, is you have varying degrees of responsibility based on the human interaction involved, and then where the developer of the system, or the developer of the system has liability for what happens when it gets put into operation.
Perfect. So, and Johan, what is your perspective on this spectra?
Yeah, I think it's definitely an important spectrum to keep in mind. I would say that we need to get comfortable with more automation, because if we don't automate, if we don't become more efficient and use the tools that are available to us, we're going to fall behind, and we are falling behind. I would say Sweden today, we have too slow of a pace. We are not always comfortable with automation. And when we're thinking about automation, we quite easily go directly to thinking about fully autonomous systems. So having a doctor that makes all the decisions, just an AI is doing everything. That's obviously not how it has to be. We can have a human in the loop. We can have solutions that support the doctor to analyze the X-rays and do it well, and get a lot of benefits from that. Because obviously as well, we in Sweden, we have really high cost of living, which means we need to have high wages, which means that the stuff that we do needs to be super efficient. Otherwise, we cannot compete on a global market.
Perfect. And then finally, the most difficult, maybe to answer, Carolina. So the policy and the regulatory aspect of this, how well nuanced is this in the regulatory environment? This
is such an interesting and highly important topic to discuss, of course. I would say that this is at the very top of discussion when it comes to regulation. How much the human need to be in control and in the loop. And more and more we see that the regulators at EU level at least, or definitely, they want to keep humans in the loop as much as possible. We do have it in the GDPR, the Data Protection Regulation, and now with the AI Acts, it's the same kind of twist. I mean, it's not that easy when you work with lobbying for industry. It's not that easy to be that to describe that you can rely on autonomous systems. It's always this fear that technology is coming to take over. And right now after the introduction of ChatGPT in the end of last year, I mean, when you go to Brussels and discuss with EU member parliamentarians, of course, it's quite frustrating to discuss efficiency and productivity that is badly needed for our competitiveness. But at the same time, we're coming back all in all to the very important, of course, ethical aspects and democratic values and so on. So I think we need to handle both in this discussion, and maybe when you develop your system, if we can get it in from the beginning, how we take responsibility, and I mean, then we do have humans in the loop. I mean, you're developers. It's not an AI that is doing everything from the start. But of course, I mean, this is, what do we discuss here? Is it a total autonomous system, or is it more nuanced, as you described it earlier, Johan?
Perfect. And this leads us into the quite a good transition into the next question, because so Sweden is a role model for digitalization, some say, and that would mean that we have a lot of data and a lot of force in this area. So then the question becomes, does the regulations help us innovate in this area, or can it even do that, or is it always inhibitory? Must it be inhibitory? And maybe Caroline, I can start with that, and then we can go around. So
I have a little bit problem to hear what you say, but
sorry, maybe
you wanted me to start.
So maybe I was mumbling. I said, so Sweden is leading in digitalization and has a lot of data, and then I'm saying, does the regulations inhibit this innovation, or can it help it, or how can we make it so that it works together to steer this?
Okay, and as I described earlier, all those data regulations put in place now and will come into force in a few years, AI Act in 3 years from now, we guess. All those regulations, they are on EU level, and of course then we will have a level playing field, how to handle data and what could be used within the European Union. So it's not, if you think from that angle, it's not a Swedish perspective, but when we see the statistic, the EU Commission is doing statistics on digital economy society index, and there we can see that we are pretty good still when it comes to be innovative and to use digitalization as a force. But if we look to the numbers for the public sector, we need to open up much more and be much more efficient how we share data and how data is usable for companies and for public, of course, within the public organizations as well. But to answer your question, if this is good for innovation or not, I think that it's very, very important to have regulations so we know what is the playing field. And at the same time, it's important to have the possibilities, some space where you can elaborate, where you can innovate, and where you can test. So testing environments, and that is something like, for example, now with the AI Act, research and development will not be in the scope. But as soon as you put something into service, the AI, you're under AI Act and you need to be compliant. But we have other regulations like the Data Act, for example, where you actually have to share data. And that, why that came up from the EU Commission and from the member states was that when we looked on the business community around the EU, there were many startups and small and medium-sized companies that said, we need, in this data economy, we badly need to get hold of more data. So in that aspect, it's very good with that kind of regulations. But the problem is when we're not thinking about, I mean, now I'm talking about to be competitive and a competitive Sweden, of course. The problem then is if we can't protect our trade secrets and our intellectual property rights. So regulations can be good, but it can be absolutely hinder innovation as well. And when it comes to get hold of data, I mean, the regulators, they are trying to open up. We do have for the public sector several new regulations, Open Data Directive, for example, Data Governance Act, and so on. And that is if we here in Sweden, because as I mentioned a little bit earlier about the index, the Digital Economy Society Societal Index, we're not good in Sweden when it comes to the numbers of how we're using digitalization in the public sector. So if we open up more, I think both public sector and private sector could innovate much more. So that is something that is more specifically for Sweden. We need to look more on our neighbors in Finland.
Thanks. Good, and I understand that the question was so broad, so you could go on forever and nuance
forever.
this. So sorry.
Until tomorrow.
But Johan, so what is your perspective on this, since you're leading in the innovation part?
Yeah, I mean, there needs to be a balance between regulation and innovation, obviously. So I think that's good that we're getting some regulation in place now. That's coming. And I think it's interesting as well that we in Europe are looking at near-term effects of AI, which is really tangible, really here and now. So if I deploy an AI algorithm to give you individual prices, for instance, based on what I know about you, so you get to pay 100 crowns for this, and you get to pay 200 crowns, that can be a good way for me as a business to optimize revenue and like I know things about you, so I can set different prices. But what if there's discriminatory stuff in there? So depending on who you are and your characteristics, that's not really fair. So it's good that we put things in place to make sure that AI is actually just and sensible. The US, they're focusing on these super long-term risks of AI that might happen in quite a number of years and are really like 0.000% risks. We know there are risks with AI here and now that will occur. There are already discrimination going on with AI. So I think it's great that we're doing that. I think though we in Sweden and the Nordics, we're thinking a bit too much about how we have this great data, but it's still very locked in. It's not really being utilized. And obviously the best teams want to be where the data is actually available. So I guess we have medical researchers here in the audience as well. You know how difficult that can be. And we know how important medical data will be to do new discoveries in medicine as well. So that really is an essential thing for us to solve. And there's new technologies coming as well, like federated learning, for instance, means that you might not have to have direct access to all these data sources. You can have the federated learning and train AI models. So there's so many solutions out there, but too often Swedish authorities and agencies say that we're unsure. So that's why we say no, and that's going to be a problem.
Thanks, and it seems like most of the problems that I face, at least, comes down to communication, whether it's between humans and humans or humans and systems and systems and systems. And what you describe now is that this extreme complex landscape and nuances that you experience, Johan, must be conveyed at real time to those who lead the regulation and by more intense communication. So Elias, would you like to elaborate on that question, or should
I mean, I sound a little torn because there are a lot of like preventative healthcare companies coming into play at the moment, and I was offered, I'm not going to say who, to scan my body, for example. And obviously, I very much envision a future where that kind of technique is very, very useful. But also, I'm very aware that I don't necessarily want to put my own body out there in a data format that someone could take or bake into a model that then gets leaked out. So how do I, from a personal perspective, balance that interest in promoting regulation so that me, who's an engineer, can be innovative while still not having complete responsibility for the potential side effects, but then also how I can very much profit from the innovation that could happen?
I would say, though, it's not just the Nordics that can be good at ethical AI and think about data in an ethical way. All the countries in the world are thinking about this. So I think sometimes we're a bit too short-sighted looking at, we can do the most responsible, most correct and nice AI. Others are trying to do that as well. So we cannot think that that's going to be our moat, our competitive advantage, and but others will definitely try this as well. And ethics differ from country to country, culture to culture. Sure. What makes sense is very different. And we need also to look at the practicalities. So maybe someone somewhere develops a new cancer-treating drug that's really state-of-the-art. Maybe they did it in a way that's ethical in their culture, but not in our culture. But it's still the best performing drug. will we use that in Sweden if it's not in alignment? The development was not in line with our values on data privacy, for instance. That will happen. Just a question of time.
And that might also lead us very well into the next question, because since we're working at Saab, we're thinking a lot about handling these different ways of handling crises or conflicts as you say, in some countries, like in the US, they have the company in focus, EU have the individual in focus, China have maybe the state in focus, and so on. So everyone has made this type of base sentence that almost drives the whole region. So for us, we're thinking a lot about, okay, search and rescue is a big field, and everyone wants to save people, whether it's in search and rescue, it could be in a crisis, but it could also be, let's say it's someone who's sick. But as soon as you choose whether you want to save someone, you can as easily decide if you don't want to save it. So this transition between this crisis of search and rescue and conflicts creates a very difficult question. And I want to throw that at Elias, that might be able to elaborate more.
I mean, the sort of duality of use cases is kind of, back to the data question, is a bit of an issue for some people who want to develop solutions within the sort of emergency response scene and even sort of like total defense spaces, because we need certain types of data from government agencies that currently are very heavily regulated, where they may not be able to share data even within their own organizations. And how do we build autonomous systems or AI-driven systems that are very helpful in emergency response situations when we have those kinds of limits? I'd like to see more kind of introductions of exceptions towards certain use cases. And I think that when it comes to sort of duality of use cases, that's very much we have to adhere to certain international humanitarian laws and so on when it comes to the usage. But if we design correctly and design from the beginning where we have human in the loop as a initial stepping stone, then I think it shouldn't be too much of an issue to create very safe systems that can be deployed in even the most extreme environments.
And Johan, would you like to elaborate on that or have any comments?
No, I really agree with that position. I think sometimes we're a bit too afraid to explore automation and autonomy, where there definitely are ways to do it in a safe way. And I think human in the loop is a good principle. So definitely when we have high-risk situations, we need to have a human there. That's an expert that can make the most crucial decisions. And we shouldn't leave decisions around life and death to a machine, obviously. That should be humans that do that, even if it's difficult, even for a human.
And I suppose it becomes a good analogy to think about the self-driving car that has been coming for many years now. It's always a couple of years away, and I've heard that some companies are augmenting the data so they have an equivalent of their car driving by itself for 1 million years or 10 million years. So it starts to come up to this statistical point where you can't deny it anymore, its ability to self-drive.
Have a mic. Do we have time for a question on trust?
Shoot.
So this is the question from one person in the audience. What are the success factors to make humans and end users trust autonomous AI systems? The one you introduced when we began the panel.
Yeah. Anyone who wants to take it.
But if I go first?
Yeah, of course.
Okay,
Yeah.
Thanks. But isn't that why we make regulations? To try to really get trust from society, from citizens, from consumers, and so on. So the easy answer would be regulations, but of course at the same time it's highly important that we discuss ethics around autonomous systems and AI uses, of course. So. As a start.
Yeah, I would say transparency is always helpful. Then I guess as well, like people will, if there's an autonomous search and rescue thing that saves you from drowning in the lake, you will be quite happy, and you will, because it's really helping you in a sense. But then, so then trust is also in the performance of the solution, how well it performs, and also the transparency on the solution, showcasing when it's not sure. So there is uncertainty, there's risk here and so on, to showcase really the limits of the system so that people can understand when it's fine and when it's not fine.
And I suppose it comes down to being able to quantify or create metrics in order to really quantize that. Do you have
I mean, we can have that. Regulations are really good, and I do really want policies in place. Unfortunately, there are people that don't adhere to all laws and all policies. So what we do then, and I think from a more engineering perspective, we can design trustworthy systems that have that built into the actual system design to begin with. And I think that's somewhere where we need to be able to put a lot more effort. And I think regulating first before knowing how to do that necessarily might not necessarily be the best step. It could be a step. And I think that's a discussion for the people to, come to terms with.
But it's to add something shortly. You mentioned transparency, Johan. Of course, that is crucial in many, many ways, but also accountability. And even though, I mean, as a deployer, maybe you don't want to have all the accountability, but we must remember that it's machines we're talking about, and they're always need in a trustworthy society. I think we need to have very clear accountability regulations.
Thanks. Okay, so we have to wrap up now, and I'll give one last question. And the question was actually going to be more forward-looking, but because we've been on the clouds and fluffing around, I would like to ask instead, when you get home from this panel, is there some force or something that will guide you to make a first step in something that you've been thinking about? Has it given you energy to do something that you've not? What would you do when you get home? What is your first step? Because that's almost the most difficult question. So I put you on the line there. When you get home, what is your action?
I think it's looking for the small opportunities in your daily life. There's always things that can be made easier, like you can iron out some kinks and so on, make things smoother in life. So that's my recommendation.
Elias, what are you going to do? What were you going to do?
That's a very good question. I mean, get to work. We can't really talk about what we work with.
Work with what?
Definitely get to work.
Do?
I mean, I agree with taking those small steps, looking at the next little opportunity, even tomorrow.
I'm not sure what I'm supposed to answer here, but when it comes to trust and when it comes to technological involvement or emerging technology and so on, for me it's very important to try to learn more and try to understand a little bit more about how things work. So I hope I will go on with that.
Thank you a lot for contributing to this panel, and thank you all for listening.